Hello, my name is Ray Bowman. I've been involved in international trade for over 30 years. I'm a certified global business professional. I'm also the director of the EDC Small Business Development Center. It's an SBA program that gives free assistance to small and medium-sized companies. I'm the program chair for the U.S. Southern California District Export Council. We're volunteers appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to promote U.S. exports. I'm also a professor at California Lutheran University and Santa Barbara City College, who offer degree programs in international trade, supply chain logistics, and marketing. I'm a member of several trade organizations, including the American Association of Exporters and Importers, as well as NASBITE, which is dedicated to small business international trade education. In this lesson, I want to go over just the basic constructs of export shipping from the U.S. and the supply chain. So just to give you a quick overview of what this looks like, because it's often hard to imagine the concept of exporting unless you kind of show it in graphic terms. So I'm going to show you this chart here, and it'll sort of break out what the supply chain looks like when you're exporting from the U.S. So the first part of an export, and think of any supply chain in three different parts. So I break the supply chain into what we call the export phase. So this is all the things that happen in the origin country that are related to the export transaction. En route, which is everything related to the transportation of the goods once they've left. And then the import phase, which is all the steps that have to do with anything that happens once the goods have arrived in the destination country. So if we look at it, the first part of an international transaction is the manufacture or the readiness of the goods by the U.S. seller. The next is what we call pre-carriage, which is basically the loading and preparation of the goods to a carrier, which will deliver to the first port of exit. Before that happens, there's going to be documentation and customs formalities. So this is where a freight forwarder gets in being a liaison between you and the regulations and setting up or coordinating the export transaction. So because of that, think of a freight forwarder as sort of a travel agent for goods. Then the goods have to go to a terminal. So this could be a truck terminal, air freight terminal, ocean freight terminal, whatever the mode of transportation is. Then you have the actual mode of transportation. This could be sea freight, this could be air freight, truck, rail, whatever the mode of transportation. At this point, though, the goods are en route, which means if there were any mistakes in the export portion, in other words, customs formalities weren't done correctly, there were mistakes in documentation, the pre-carriage, something went wrong there, goods were damaged, any of those things, really it's hard to remedy once the goods are en route. So it's very important to get the export portion right before the goods go en route. After that, there's very little adjusting. Then next is the arrival of the goods. So this is when freight forwarders and customs brokers get involved. Freight forwarders get involved in the arrival notices of the freight. Customs brokers get involved in working with customs to clear the goods on behalf of the receiving party. After that is the post-carriage, or we also refer to as on-carriage, and then the delivery to the buyer. So if you imagine the supply chain, all these steps are happening in whatever the export is. No matter what mode it is, you're going to have these main features. So if we look at some of the requirements, there may be export requirements, so it's important to look up the regulations prior to exporting. Considering the weight and measure and the dimensions of the shipment, transportation costing is based on weight and measure. In other words, carriers charge either by the total dimensions of an item or the actual weight, whichever is greater. Freight forwarding quotes. Most shipments go or are arranged by freight forwarder. So it's important to know what that freight forwarder is going to charge and making sure that they get all the accurate information that they need. Shipment booking. It's important. If you've obligated as an exporter to get goods within a certain time frame, it's equally important to make sure that that booking will accommodate the time frame that you have. Documentation. In any international transactions, minimum, you'll have a commercial invoice, packing list, and bill of lading. But you may have a lot of other required documents, so it's important to check which of those documents you need. It's not uncommon to have wood packaging certificates, certificates of origin, certificates of free sale, so there's a lot of other documents that could be required. AES filing. Out of the U.S., we do an export declaration, and it's electronically through the automated export system. So it's very important to coordinate with your freight forwarder and be aware of the requirements under the automated export system. Not complying with the system can not only result in penalties, but delay or non-shipment of your items. So it's a very important step. Next is the freight forwarder pickup, making sure that the goods are picked up in enough time to meet the shipping demands of the carrier. Customs may inspect, so particularly if you're exporting under an export license, you have to consider that. The goods en route, making sure that you've routed the goods properly to get there within the right time. Understanding that once goods arrive, they go through a customs process, which can involve valuating the items, inspecting them, calculating duties and taxes. So those are important steps. Then the on-carriage or delivery of the goods, making sure that's coordinated and on time. And then finally the goods are received by the importer. So along that line, there's some typical fees that are important to look at. There's export documentation. In this current market, that could be $100 or more, and a lot of those fees are charged through the freight forwarder. Understanding both the weight and measure component, but also the timing component of pre-carriage. In other words, the pickup to the carrier that will ultimately ship the goods. Understanding that freight charges are based on weight and measure, and making sure that you've calculated those correctly. On carriage, knowing that weight and measure can also affect your charges on carriage, which is the delivery to the ultimate buyer. And loading and unloading fees, understanding that there may be other fees involved with handling the cargo. So it's very important as a best practice that when you're dealing with your freight forwarder or your carrier exporting goods, that you fully describe the requirements that you have under your export. In other words, describing what the items are, describing the timing of your shipment, being very specific as to the weight and measure, the dimensions and the actual weight of your product. Doing your homework ahead of time, working with your freight forwarder to work out all of the regulations that are required for your shipment, not only to export successfully, but also import successfully. Also communicating all of this information and coordinating with your buyer, who most likely is going to handle the importation and customs formalities within their country. So I hope this video is helpful in demonstrating some of the basics of what the export supply chain looks like.